John Wayne died on June 11, 1979 in Los Angeles, California at the age of 72. His death closed the curtain on one of the most iconic and unshakably American careers in film history. To millions, he was the Duke, the towering figure who defined rugged masculinity for an entire generation. A cowboy, a soldier, a symbol. With his slow drawl and steady glare, he turned Westerns into myth and patriotism into box office gold. But beyond the bravado and the Stetson hat was a man whose legacy reaches far beyond the silver screen. 3 marriages, 7 children. Some followed him into Hollywood, others into quiet lives that bore the weight of his name. What became of the children raised under the shadow of a man America called a legend? The third child among John Wayne's 7 children was Patrick Wayne, and in the eyes of the public, he was the brightest to ever stand in his father's shadow. Born in 1919, shortly after Stagecoach turned John Wayne into a household name, Patrick entered a world already echoing with the sound of fame. As a child, he was known as Little Duke, a fixture on his father's film sets, where he grew up surrounded by dusty boots, rolling cameras, and the quiet pressure of legacy. By the time he turned 12, his father looked him in the eye and said, "When people see you, they'll think of me." Make it worth it. It wasn't advice, it was expectation, carved deep into the life ahead. Patrick eventually followed that path. With over 40 films to his name, including more than a dozen alongside his father, he carried the Wayne name into Hollywood's next chapter. He appeared in classics like The Searchers, McClintock, and Big Jake, often playing the clean-cut son or the principled sidekick. With his square jaw and quiet confidence, Patrick had the look and bearing of a leading man. In 1907, he landed the lead role in Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, a high-profile chance to prove he could carry a film on his own. But that moment became the turning point. The film bombed, critics laughed, the audience didn't buy it, and Patrick, despite his talent, couldn't escape the impossible comparison. He didn't fail as an actor, he failed to be John Wayne. After that, the spotlight dimmed. He turned to television, hosted game shows, made fewer film appearances. But even as his own stardom faded, Patrick remained the most public of the Wayne children. At every tribute, memorial, or Western Film Festival, he showed up, silver-haired, smiling, unmistakably his father's son. In the portrait of the Wayne legacy, Patrick is the one who dared to walk directly into the legend's light. He didn't outrun the shadow, but he stood inside it longer than anyone. He had the frame of a legend, but the shadow was bigger than all of it. The 6th child of John Wayne's 7 children was Ethan Wayne, and unlike his older siblings who grew up chasing their father's spotlight, Ethan was born into its fading glow. He arrived in 1962 when the Duke was already a towering figure, both on screen and off. John Wayne was no longer proving himself. He was the American myth made flesh. By the time Ethan was old enough to walk, his father wasn't riding across open plains but spending long stretches aboard the Wild Goose, a converted naval minesweeper turned private yacht. That boat, rocking gently off the California coast, became Ethan's childhood home. There his father taught him how to throw ropes, tie knots, and read the rhythm of the sea. "You don't always have to win," John told him once. "You just need to keep the ship steady." That memory would shape everything Ethan became. As a teenager, he didn't rush to act, even though his last name opened doors. He worked as a stuntman, quietly learning the business from the ground up. But as the years passed and the Wayne legacy drifted from the screen into nostalgia, Ethan took on a different role, the guardian of the brand. He became head of John Wayne Enterprises and the John Wayne Cancer Foundation, not just preserving an image, but defending a legacy. His turning point came in 2011 when the family was dragged into a legal battle over the use of the John Wayne name. Ethan stood before attorneys, historians, and a media firestorm. The most powerful moment wasn't what he said, it was what he brought. The small urn containing his father's ashes, placed gently beside his notes. It was a silent reminder. This wasn't just a brand, it was blood. Today, Ethan isn't on screen, but he's everywhere. The name Wayne still carries weight. In charity events, museum exhibits, and courtrooms where memory is currency. He never tried to be the next Duke. He didn't need to. He didn't become his father. He made sure the world never forgot him. The fifth child of John Wayne's 7 children was Aissa Wayne, and in many ways she was the most outspoken, the most visible, and the most defiant of them all. Born in 1956 during the height of her father's stardom, Aissa entered a world already sealed by legend. While some of her siblings were raised in modest homes with struggling parents, Aissa was born into the empire, into Newport Beach mansions, movie premieres, private security, and a father whose face wasn't just on the big screen, but etched into American culture. She didn't just grow up watching John Wayne movies. She grew up hearing them echo through the walls of her own life. There were no bedtime stories, only war scripts rehearsed in the hallway. No ordinary father-daughter walks, only grand appearances at award shows where the Duke towered beside her. But despite the grandeur, Aissa always craved something simpler. Her favorite memory, one she still talks about today, isn't from a red carpet or film set. It's the grainy cassette tape of her father whistling a lullaby into a recorder for her to play while he was away. She kept it hidden in a drawer for decades. That personal contrast between public grandeur and private softness shaped Aissa's entire journey. As a teenager, Aissa knew she didn't want to act. She didn't want to be another Wayne in boots. Instead, she studied law, graduated from Pepperdine University, and became a family attorney. While her brothers looked to continue or protect the cinematic legacy, Aissa wanted to make her own mark. On the bench, not on the screen. But her father's name never left her side. In every courtroom, on every campaign trail, John Wayne's ghost lingered. Sometimes it opened doors, other times it slammed them shut. In 1991, she published John Wayne, My Father, a memoir that offered fans a rare glimpse into the personal man behind the persona. It was heartfelt and protective, but not without edge. Aissa didn't pretend her father was perfect. She showed his contradictions. The cowboy with a tender side, the patriot with a temper, the distant yet devoted dad. The book sold well. It was praised, but it also planted her deeper into a life she tried to walk away from. Then came the turning point, a moment that would split public opinion and reshape how Aissa was seen in her later years. In 2016, she launched a campaign to become a judge in Los Angeles County. She ran on experience, principle, and justice, but the headlines didn't read Attorney Aissa Wayne. They read John Wayne's daughter enters politics. And almost immediately, her last name became both a spotlight and a target. Activist groups dug into her father's old interviews. They unearthed controversial quotes from a 1971 Playboy interview that were suddenly being held against her, as if his words were her own. Aissa tried to respond with poise, saying, "I'm proud to be my father's daughter, but I'm not running on his record. I'm running on mine." It didn't matter. The coverage grew hostile. Op-eds attacked. Social media erupted. And when election night arrived, the verdict was brutal. She lost. Not by much, but enough to prove that the Wayne name no longer guaranteed victory. For many, it was the end of her public ambitions. But for Aissa, it was simply the next chapter. In the years since, she's doubled down on defending her father's legacy. When critics push to remove John Wayne's name from public buildings or question his place in modern culture, Aissa is often the first to respond. Not with nostalgia, but with sharp, unapologetic clarity. He was a man of his time. Not a man without fault, she once said on live TV. But if we erase every person who spoke imperfectly in the past, we'll soon have no one left to learn from. That comment, like most things Aissa says, sparked a firestorm. But she didn't back down. Today, Aissa remains a complex and polarizing figure in the Wayne family saga. She is not the fan favorite. She is not the quiet protector. She is the one who speaks when a silence would be safer. She is the daughter who chose law over legacy and then found herself fighting to keep both. She is the one who walked into courtrooms, campaign trails, and live interviews with a name that could both crown her and crush her. She didn't run from the Wayne legacy. She ran with it, even when it nearly tripped her. The first child of John Wayne's 7 children was Michael Wayne. And unlike the others, he wasn't shaped by the glow of Hollywood fame, but by the grind of a father still clawing his way up. Born in 1934, Michael arrived during a time when the man who would become the Duke was still just Marion Morrison, a struggling actor in B-Westerns, barely earning enough to keep the lights on. He didn't grow up in mansions. He grew up watching his father leave before sunrise and come home covered in desert dust, dragging the weight of roles that paid little and promised less. For Michael, John Wayne was never just a movie star. He was a working man with calloused hands and silent burdens. That image never left him, and it may be why Michael never tried to become John Wayne on screen. He chose to build something quieter but far more lasting behind the scenes. Bias. As a teenager, Michael wasn't drawn to the spotlight. He had no desire for applause or close-ups. Instead, he studied business and film production at Loyola University, where he became fascinated with what made movies work, not just emotionally but logistically. While his siblings rode horses on set, Michael sat in the producer's tent watching budgets rise and schedules fall apart. His father noticed. During the making of The Alamo in 1960, John Wayne gave his son a critical assignment: oversee key logistical operations. It was a test. Michael passed. From there, a lifelong partnership formed, not actor and director, but father and fixer. Michael would go on to manage Bat Jock Productions, John Wayne's independent film company, and oversee many of his father's most ambitious films, including McClintock, The Green Berets, and Chisholm. But Michael didn't just organize sets. He built infrastructure. He structured deals. He negotiated foreign rights. And after John Wayne's death in 1979, he took on the role no script ever prepared him for: custodian of a legacy that millions idolized but no one fully understood. It was Michael who initiated the legal groundwork for protecting the John Wayne name. And it was Michael who laid the foundation for what would become the John Wayne Cancer Foundation. Still, the role came at a cost. In the years following his father's death, disagreements within the family surfaced about assets, trademarks, and the very definition of legacy. While Michael tried to centralize control for the sake of consistency, not all siblings agreed. The job became more than business. It became battlefield. His turning point came in 1985 when Michael was diagnosed with prostate cancer, the same disease that would later be the focus of the foundation bearing his father's name. But instead of stepping back, he pushed forward harder. He began working long hours from a modest office above a warehouse, drafting out what he called the next years of John Wayne. His health weakened, but his resolve didn't. In one of his final interviews, he said, "People think we're preserving a statue. We're not. We're preserving a man with all the grit and flaws and guts he stood for." That statement defined his mission, not to turn his father into an untouchable icon, but to preserve the humanity within the myth. Michael Wayne passed away in 2003, largely unknown to the public that still worshipped his father. He wasn't a household name. He wasn't celebrated at film festivals. But within the industry and the family, his influence was unmistakable. Today, every piece of licensed John Wayne merchandise, every exhibit, every quote etched into a museum wall, all of it bears the invisible fingerprints of Michael Wayne. He was the son who didn't inherit the spotlight, but inherited the weight. He didn't protect the legend from the world. He protected it from fading into fiction. The 7th and youngest child of John Wayne's 7 children is Marisa Wayne, and by the time she was born in 1966, her father was no longer chasing fame. He was fame. For Marisa, John Wayne wasn't the cowboy in a dusty hat galloping across the frontier. He was the tired man in a leather armchair, remote in hand, flickering between news channels and Western reruns where he watched himself on mute. She didn't grow up on film sets or hear directors shouting action. She grew up in Newport Beach, in a house that smelled of sea air and cigars, where her dad was already in the final chapters of his life. Marisa never knew the version of John Wayne that audiences adored in True Grit or The Searchers. She knew the aging version, softened by chemotherapy, slowed by surgeries, but still towering in presence. To her, he wasn't a screen icon. He was a man trying to make sure his children remembered him without a camera rolling. As a child, Marisa was both sheltered and shadowed. She was the baby of the family, often spared from the pressures her older siblings faced. But that didn't mean she was free of expectation. John Wayne may have mellowed in his final years, but he was still a firm believer in toughness. "You don't cry to get your way," he told her once. "You look him in the eye and make your way." It wasn't advice so much as a life philosophy passed down like a family heirloom. Though he died when she was just 13 years old, the impact of his presence remained etched into every decision she made. She didn't pursue acting. She didn't join the family's business arms in their early years. Instead, she carved out a quieter path, first through sports, then through motherhood, and eventually through public advocacy. As she matured, Marisa realized that being John Wayne's daughter wasn't just about nostalgia. It was a responsibility, especially in a world that had changed drastically since her father's time. While the older Waynes preserved the legacy through film, law, and business, Marisa found herself drawn into the cultural battle over her father's memory. And the turning point came in 20, when protests and public debates swept across the United States. An Orange County activist petitioned to rename John Wayne Airport. The argument, his 1971 Playboy interview, which included racially insensitive and politically controversial statements, made him unfit to represent modern American values. Suddenly, Marisa, the quietest Wayne, became the loudest voice in the room. She gave interviews. She wrote op-eds. She stood before the TV cameras not to defend every word her father ever spoke, but to defend his humanity. "You can't judge a man from the past using today's lens," she said in one interview. "If we erase history, we erase the lessons that come with it." Her words sparked fierce backlash. Social media lit up. News segments questioned whether her family was clinging to a legacy best left behind. But Marisa didn't retreat. At a town hall meeting in Orange County, she stood behind the podium, clutching her father's military burial flag, her voice shaking but steady. He was a man who loved this country, served it in film, inspired millions, and gave everything to his family. If that's not worth remembering, then what is? Since that moment, Marisa has become one of the most emotionally resonant defenders of her father's image. She may not run a foundation or a production company, but she's the one who speaks when the legacy is on trial. She appears at museum exhibits, interviews, and even podcast features where she shares personal moments. Her father brushing her hair before school or whispering jokes during his final hospital visits. To fans, she offers something the others don't: intimacy, the version of John Wayne not as a cowboy or general, but as a dying man holding his daughter's hand. In the larger story of the Wayne family, Marisa is the final chapter. Not because she's the youngest, but because she carries the memory with emotion, not strategy. She's not the enforcer, the lawyer, or the businessman. She's the one who felt the loss most raw, and who now stands in front of a culture ready to discard her father like outdated film stock. She doesn't guard the brand, she guards the man. The fourth child of John Wayne's 7 children is Melinda Wayne. And while her name rarely appears in headlines or on marquees, her role in protecting her father's legacy has been one of the most quietly consequential. Born in 1940, at a time when John Wayne was on the cusp of becoming Hollywood's dominant cowboy, Melinda came into the world during a period of flux. Her father was still hustling between film sets, playing tough guys in low-budget westerns, while her mother, Josephine, tried to anchor the household with structure and Catholic values. Unlike her older brother Michael, who felt the burden of carrying the family name, or her younger siblings born into luxury, Melinda's childhood straddled 2 worlds, one foot in a modest blue-collar upbringing, the other inching toward the vast shadow of fame. In interviews, Melinda has rarely spoken, but those who've worked alongside her say she was always the most observant. As a girl, she noticed the small details the cameras missed: her father's boots placed at the door in perfect order, the way he went silent after filming violent scenes, the way he never apologized but always showed up the next morning with her favorite vanilla donuts. One afternoon when she was 8, John Wayne handed her a small radio. a birthday gift he'd bought during a shoot in Texas, and said, "Use this to listen to the world, not escape from it." That line stuck with her, and it would define how she saw both her father and the world he left behind. Melinda didn't go into acting, nor did she seek a spotlight of her own. Her life was largely off-camera, built on family, faith, and a fierce sense of duty. But when John Wayne died in 1979 and the legal skirmishes over his name, image, and legacy began to escalate, Melinda found herself pulled into a role no one assigned in her pantomime, that of a guardian of authenticity. While her brothers handled licensing and brand strategy, Melinda focused on accuracy. She sifted through old contracts, challenged unauthorized uses of her father's likeness, and advised lawyers on whether a project genuinely reflected her father's values or just exploited his image for profit. Her knowledge of his work wasn't just emotional, it was encyclopedic. Her turning point came in '99, when a major advertising firm attempted to digitally insert John Wayne into a commercial for a brand of cigarettes, something he never endorsed. The ad was slick, patriotic, and legal teams argued it was protected under fair use. But for Melinda, it was personal. She led the charge from within the family to file suit, eventually forcing the company to pull the ad. During a rare press conference, she held up a still from the commercial and said calmly but firmly, "My father died of cancer. You don't get to make him sell the thing that killed him." That image of the quietest Wayne standing before microphones, defending not just a name but a man's dignity, left a mark. Since then, Melinda has remained a behind-the-scenes presence in most John Wayne-related affairs. She is rarely seen at tribute galas or autograph events, but when legal disputes arise or film retrospectives are curated, her input is often the final word. She's the one who ensures that a documentary uses real dialogue instead of dramatized quotes, that his image appears on projects he would have approved of, and that no one turns the Duke into a caricature. In family meetings, she is the voice that asks, "Is this true? Would he have said that? Would he have liked this?" In the larger legacy of John Wayne, Melinda is not the warrior, the showman, or the lawyer. She is the archivist of integrity, the person who remembers that before there was fame, there was a man with values, flaws, and lines he wouldn't cross. She didn't inherit the spotlight. She inherited the responsibility to keep it honest. The second child of John Wayne's 7 children was Toni Wayne, and of all his daughters, she remains the most quietly mysterious. Born in 1936, Toni entered a world where her father was still a man named Marion, hustling through bit parts, chasing roles that rarely made it past the B-movie circuit. Fame hadn't found him yet. The Wayne family at that point lived modestly in Southern California, moving between rentals while John Wayne tried to keep food on the table with a smile built for the screen, but a paycheck that rarely matched it. Toni's early years weren't surrounded by red carpets or movie premieres. They were spent in secondhand dresses, attending Sunday Mass with her mother, and watching her father disappear for weeks at a time on location shoots. She was a child born before the legend, and as the legend grew, she never stepped into its light. As she grew older, Toni watched her father's ascent from the kitchen table. By the time she was a teenager, Red River had already made him an icon, and the public's version of John Wayne began replacing the man she had known as Daddy. But unlike her brothers, who tried to follow him into the business, or her sisters, who later took part in preserving his image, Toni never sought to define herself by her father's name. That didn't mean she was distant. She was frequently seen at family gatherings, occasionally visiting sets, and even played minor roles in 2 of her father's films, The Quiet Man and The Alamo. In The Alamo, she's barely visible, her role so small it passed under even the most die-hard fans' radar. But for Toni, those cameos weren't auditions. They were gestures, nods of affection from a father trying to make space for each of his children, however briefly, in his world. Toni's adulthood took a different road. While others in the Wayne family built careers or legacies tied to John Wayne's name, she chose a quieter life. She married, had children, and moved further from the public eye. There was no business she managed, no press she granted, no interviews where she reminisced about life with the Duke. Instead, she became a memory known mostly through others. Her life was anchored in privacy, perhaps a rebellion of its own against the suffocating weight of family fame. But her decision to step away didn't mean she was immune to the consequences of the name she carried. Her turning point came in 1979 after her father's death. As the family gathered for the reading of his will and began the long, complicated process of sorting through his estate, Toni quietly discovered that she had been largely excluded from key financial distributions. It wasn't a scandal, it wasn't public, but it hit hard. There was no confrontation, no lawsuit, just silence. At her father's funeral, Toni stood toward the back, wrapped in a black shawl, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't cry in front of cameras. But several family friends recall seeing her place a single photo inside her father's casket, a faded black and white picture of them horseback riding on the set of The Quiet Man. It was her way of saying goodbye and of keeping something private in a family defined by public memory. In the decades that followed, Toni remained largely unknown to the broader public. When tributes were organized, her name was rarely listed. When interviews were requested, she politely declined. And when the family brand expanded, merchandise, books, theme exhibits, she remained uninvolved. But that doesn't mean she disappeared. She was present at births, weddings, and quiet family reunions. Her children remember her as a gentle soul, someone who spoke of her father not as John Wayne but as my dad, who worked too hard and came home tired. In the mosaic of the Wayne family, Toni is not the bold stroke or the centerpiece. She's the shadowed edge, subtle, real, and essential. Her life wasn't lived for the cameras, and that may be the truest form of resistance in a family built on film. She didn't follow the spotlight. She walked quietly behind it, holding the memories no one else saw. But John Wayne's family story is just one chapter in a much larger legend, a world where the man who stood 10 feet tall on screen left behind a legacy that was far more fragile off camera. 7 children, each carrying a different version of the Duke in their memory. The father, the boss, the icon, the stranger. But this story is not unique. Across Hollywood's golden halls are other families built around immortal names. Families that fracture quietly, bleed silently, and protect secrets the cameras never caught. In the episodes ahead, we'll step into those untold legacies, where the truth isn't written in film credits, but in what was left out. If you don't want to miss what comes next, subscribe to Legacy Uncovered and join us as we reveal more hidden lives behind the legends. Thank you for listening.